Okay, so today we're diving into a case that's been all over the news lately, and it's a really complex situation. You know, imagine you're a young guy, 18 years old, on vacation, having a good time, vacation romance, and all of a sudden you're facing jail time.
Yeah, it's a pretty wild story.
It is, and it all centers around Marcus Fakana, a British teenager who was in Dubai when he got involved with a 17-year-old girl, also British,
Oh, so
and
they were both tourists.
yeah, they were both on holiday there, and now she's since turned 18, but he's been sentenced to a year in prison because of their relationship.
Wow. Okay, so right away we see this clash of legal systems because in many places a relationship between two people that close in age wouldn't be an issue legally, especially if it's consensual.
Exactly, and that seems to be the real crux of this whole thing. The age of consent in Dubai and the UAE is 18. So even though their relationship was consensual and she's legally an adult now, he was still convicted under their laws.
It really highlights how important it is to be aware of local laws and customs when you're traveling, because what might be perfectly fine in one country could land you in serious trouble in another.
Right, and it's not always obvious. You might not even think to look up something like the age of consent when you're planning a vacation.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But this case is a stark reminder that those differences exist, and they can have very real consequences.
So let's back up a bit and get a clearer picture of what actually happened. Fakana and the girl were on holiday in Dubai, and everything seemed fine, but then things took a turn after they returned to the UK.
Oh, so the legal troubles started back in Britain.
Well, that's where things get even more complicated. It was the girl's mother who reported the relationship to the Dubai authorities after seeing messages between them.
So the report came after they were already back home. That adds another layer to this for sure.
Yeah, you've got to wonder about the reach of legal systems across borders. Like how much power do authorities in one country have over events that happen somewhere else?
Right, it raises all sorts of questions about jurisdiction and international law.
But let's focus on Dubai and the UAE's legal system for a moment.
Yeah.
What are we actually talking about here? What are the specific laws that led to his conviction?
Well, I don't think we have the exact legal articles, but we can talk about the general context. Dubai being part of the UAE follows Sharia law principles.
Oh, right. So that's going to be a lot different from the legal systems in many Western countries.
Exactly. And Sharia law often has stricter interpretations when it comes to relationships outside of marriage.
Right.
So even though both Fakana and the girl were close in age and it was consensual, the fact that she was under 18 at the time likely triggered these legal provisions.
And that brings up another interesting point. Even though the girl is now an adult and doesn't seem to be pressing charges, the case is still proceeding based on the laws of Dubai at the time of the incident.
Yeah, it's not about whether she feels like a victim or not. It's about whether the actions violated the law of the land where they took place.
And where is Fakana now while all of this is going on?
He's currently being held in Al Awir prison in Dubai.
Oh, wow. That's a pretty serious facility, isn't it?
It is. It's a prison for adult men, so he's definitely not in a juvenile detention center or anything like that.
That's got to be incredibly tough for him, and his family back in the UK is obviously outraged. They've been staging protests in London demanding his release, calling the sentence unfathomable. It's just a heartbreaking situation all around.
Absolutely. And on top of the emotional strain, they're facing a huge financial burden as well.
How so?
They had to return to London to work to support Fakana's accommodation in Dubai while he awaits his appeal. It's costing them a fortune to keep him housed and fed and to cover legal fees.
You can only imagine the stress and worry they're going through. It's a parent's worst nightmare to have their child imprisoned in a foreign country.
And that's where organizations like Detained in Dubai come in.
Yeah.
They're a real lifeline for people who find themselves caught up in the UAE's legal system.
Detained in Dubai, what can you tell us about them?
They're a nonprofit organization that helps foreigners navigate the UAE's legal system. In situations where cultural differences and legal nuances create complications.
So they're like a guide and advocate for people who are unfamiliar with the local laws.
Exactly.
Yeah.
In Fakana's case, they're advocating for his release and working to get him the best possible outcome.
Well, it's good to know that there's someone out there fighting for him, but it's still a daunting situation. So, detained in Dubai, are they actually optimistic about his chances of being released?
They seem to think so. Rada Sterling, who works with Detained in Dubai, has publicly said that she expects the sentence to be overturned on appeal.
Oh, really? That's encouraging. So they believe he's got a good shot at coming home soon.
It sounds that way.
Okay.
They seem to think there's a strong legal basis for the appeal.
Well, let's hope they're right. This whole situation just makes you think about all the things that can go wrong when you're traveling to places with different laws and customs.
It really does. It's a reminder that we need to be informed and prepared when we travel abroad, and that even seemingly harmless actions can have serious consequences in a foreign country.
You're absolutely right. It's about being aware of those cultural and legal differences and making sure we're respecting the laws and customs of the places we visit.
Exactly. And it's not about being paranoid or avoiding travel altogether. It's about being informed and respectful.
Well said. Now, this whole thing with the girl's mother reporting the relationship after they returned to the UK, that adds another layer of complexity, doesn't it?
It definitely does. It raises all sorts of questions about jurisdiction and the reach of legal systems across borders.
Like, how can authorities in one country act on events that happen somewhere else? It seems like a real legal gray area.
It is. And it's going to be interesting to see how that aspect plays out in the appeal process.
Absolutely. So we've got this complex legal situation with international implications. And in the middle of it all is this young guy, Marcus Fakana, stuck in prison while he awaits his appeal. It's a lot to unpack.
It really is. And there's so much more to delve into. We need to look at the appeal process itself, the arguments that will be made, the potential outcomes, and of course the human impact of this whole ordeal.
You're right. There's a lot to consider. We'll need to take a closer look at all of that. So we'll be back after a short break to continue our deep dive into this fascinating and troubling case.
So, when we talk about this appeal, it's not just about the law itself, but also how it's applied in this specific situation.
Yeah, it feels like there's a lot of room for interpretation here. Like how much weight will the court give to the fact that the relationship was consensual and that the girl is now of age?
Right. And that's where Fakana's legal team is going to have to be really sharp. Yeah. They need to make a compelling case that focuses on those mitigating factors.
So what kind of arguments do you think they might make?
Well, I imagine they'll emphasize the consensual nature of the relationship and the fact that the girl is now legally an adult, both in the UAE and in the UK.
Makes sense. They'll probably argue that applying the law so strictly in this case, where there was no victim pressing charges and the relationship was between two young people who are close in age, that it's just disproportionate.
Exactly. They might say that the punishment doesn't fit the crime, so to speak.
So it's like they're acknowledging the law, but questioning its application in this particular situation.
Precisely. They're going to try to poke holes in the prosecution's case and show that there are extenuating circumstances that warrant a more lenient outcome.
And what about what kind of evidence could they present to support their argument?
Well, anything that proves the consensual nature of the relationship will be crucial. Messages, photos, maybe even testimony from the girl herself.
Oh, yeah. If she's willing to cooperate, that could be a game changer.
It could. And they might also present evidence of Fakana's good character, lack of any prior criminal record, anything to paint him in a positive light.
Trying to show that he's not some kind of predator, that he's just a young guy who made a mistake.
Exactly. They want the court to see him as a human being, not just a case file.
It's a good strategy, but ultimately it all comes down to how the court interprets the law, right?
It does. The judges will consider the arguments, the evidence, and then make a decision based on their understanding of the law and how it applies to this specific case.
And the UAE's legal system is quite different from what we're used to in many Western countries, right?
It is. It's a multi-layered system with courts of first instance appeals courts and a federal Supreme Court.
So there's a whole hierarchy to it.
There is. And in Fakana's case, his appeal will likely be heard by the Dubai Court of Appeal.
Okay. So that's the next step in the process. And how long could that take?
It's tough to say for sure. The timelines can vary depending on the complexity of the case, the court schedule, and all sorts of factors.
So it could be weeks. It could be months.
It could be even longer. It's really a waiting game at this point.
A very stressful waiting game for Fakana and his family. And speaking of the family, how are they coping with all of this?
I can only imagine the emotional roller coaster they're going through. Their son is imprisoned in a foreign country, they're facing financial hardship, and they're dealing with the constant uncertainty of what's going to happen next.
It's a nightmare scenario. And it's a reminder that these legal battles aren't just abstract concepts. They have a real human impact on people's lives.
Exactly. It's easy to get lost in the legal arguments, but we have to remember that there are real people at the heart of this case who are suffering.
So true. And this case has really sparked a wider conversation about the challenges of navigating different legal systems and cultural norms.
It has. It's made people think twice about the potential consequences of their actions when they're traveling abroad.
Like you might not even realize you're breaking a law until it's too late.
Right. And that's why it's so important to do your research before you travel, to familiarize yourself with the local laws and customs.
It's about being a responsible traveler and respecting the culture of the place you're visiting.
Absolutely.
Yes.
And it's not just about avoiding legal trouble. It's about having a more meaningful and enriching travel experience when you understand the context of the place you're in.
So it's about education and awareness.
Exactly. And it's also about being open-minded and willing to learn from different cultures, even if those cultures are very different from our own.
Now, getting back to Fakana and his appeal, what are the possible outcomes here? What's the best case scenario?
Well, the best case scenario is that the court overturns his conviction completely and he's free to go.
He just comes home and tries to put this whole nightmare behind him.
Exactly. That would be a huge victory for him and his family.
And what about the other end of the spectrum? What's the worst case scenario?
The worst case scenario is that the appeal fails and he has to serve out the remainder of his sentence in prison.
That's a tough pill to swallow.
It would be devastating for him and his family.
So there's a lot riding on this appeal. And while we wait for the outcome, it's important to remember the human side of this story. You know, the impact this is having on Fakana, his family, and everyone who cares about them.
Right. We can't forget that this is real life with real consequences.
And it's a reminder that we all need to be more aware of the complexities of the world we live in and the potential for things to go wrong, even when we have the best intentions.
It's a lesson in humility and in recognizing that our own cultural norms aren't always universal.
Well said. This whole case has been a real eye-opener, and it's left us with a lot to think about.
It has. And it's raised some really important questions about how we navigate cultural differences, legal systems, and the idea of justice on a global scale.
And as we wrap up this part of our deep dive, I think it's worth pondering those questions, you know. How do we ensure fairness and understanding in situations like this? What are the implications for international law and cultural sensitivity in an increasingly globalized world?
Yeah, it really does make you think you know about the bigger picture and all the things we take for granted when we travel. Definitely. I mean, traveling can be such an amazing experience, but it's important to remember that we're stepping into different cultures with different values and different ways of doing things.
It's like that saying, when in Rome, you know?
Exactly. We need to be respectful of the local customs and traditions, and that starts with being informed.
So where can someone even start with that kind of research? I mean, besides just Googling laws and country, you know, are there any reliable resources you recommend?
Well, for starters, your own government's website usually has travel advisories and information about specific countries.
Oh, yeah, good point. They usually have sections on safety and security, local laws and customs, things like that.
Right. And embassies and consulates can also be helpful resources. You can often find information on their websites or contact them directly with questions.
And then there are organizations like Detained in Dubai that we talked about earlier. They offer really specific guidance on navigating the legal system in the UAE.
Exactly. So there's definitely information out there if you know where to look.
But beyond just the legal stuff, what about understanding those unspoken cultural nuances? You know, the things that might not be written down in any law book, but can still land you in hot water if you're not aware of them.
That's where it gets a bit trickier, for sure. It's not always easy to find that kind of information, but it's definitely worth the effort.
So any tips on where to start?
Well, one thing I always recommend is reading travel blogs and talking to people who have actually been to the country you're visiting.
Oh, yeah. Firsthand accounts can be super valuable. You get those insider tips and perspectives that you might not find in a guidebook.
Exactly. And even watching documentaries or films can be helpful for getting a sense of the local culture.
It's all about immersing yourself, even just a little bit, in the culture of the place you're going.
Right. It's about going beyond the tourist traps and trying to understand the place on a deeper level.
And that brings us back to Marcus Fakana. You know, while we've been discussing the broader implications of his case, it's important to remember that there's a real person at the center of all this.
Absolutely. We can't lose sight of the human cost of this situation. You know, a young man's life has been turned upside down.
He's facing serious consequences for actions that he might not have even realized were illegal.
And his family is going through an incredibly difficult time as well.
Yeah.
You know, they're dealing with the emotional stress, the financial burden of supporting him overseas. It's just a heartbreaking situation all around.
It really is. And it makes you realize how interconnected we all are. You know, our choices, even when made on holiday in a distant country, can have ripple effects that we might not anticipate.
It's a powerful reminder that we need to approach travel and life in general with a sense of awareness and responsibility.
And with a healthy dose of empathy and understanding.
Absolutely. We need to remember that people from different cultures might have different values and beliefs, and that's okay. The key is to be respectful and to try to learn from those differences.
Well said. So, as we wrap up this deep dive into this fascinating and troubling case, we hope it's given you, our listener, a new perspective on the complexities of international travel, the importance of cultural awareness, and the need for empathy and understanding in a world where different legal systems and cultural norms often collide. It's been a really thought-provoking conversation, and we appreciate you joining us.
Thanks for having me. It's been a pleasure sharing these insights with you and your listeners.